Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being on our program. I'm Armando F. Sanchez, and today we're going to do a book review, The Spy in Moscow Station. My friend Curt Hahn sent me the book and asked me to read it, and I reviewed it, and I sent it back to him. We've been going back and forth. And then we're also bringing in Craig Douglas. He is the newsletter editor, Ham Shack, in the city of Whittier, and we'll talk about that and connecting that. And the idea is to go back and tap into their background and see if we can get more details into this whole sphere of espionage with electronics. Mr. Curt Hahn, he was a
Yes,
chief
sir.
petty officer in the Navy. He retired from there. He worked in Rockwell. We never asked him what he did there because he always looks at me. He did some projects at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And then he finished his career as an educator in the Southern California School District there in the area of industrial arts. He's also a volunteer in Skills USA on a national level. So thank you and applaud that for supporting the students as well. And Craig Douglas, he was a mechanic in aircraft. Not only for several corporations, but also for the background of learning in a trade school as well. So that's really a wonderful, interesting story. And he worked for United and some other airlines as well, and got into ham radio 9 years ago, sort of an interest between him and his family members. So we're pulling in information from different levels, what I have in my background as well, and let's see where we take this into the direction. First of all, the book, The Spy of Moscow Station, in Moscow Station, written by Eric Esseltine. The idea here was that the way the book evolves is that one of the individuals at the NSA came across the question that he was given: is there someone leaking information out of the Moscow embassy, or is the electronics in the site being tapped into, and thus the information is being leaked into it? Embassies are divided in different floors, one of them being the State Department, other words, the administration. And there's always a CIA espionage department there as well. And that's pretty common in all the embassies, not only in the US, but also other foreign nations who have their embassies in our nation and around the world. But something that we need to refer to. And obviously, the one in Moscow has the greatest issues, that even building the consulate, the new one that they built, it was full of bugs already built into the building by the Russians. And this was discovered, and there's a background between all this ongoing issues. So we get to the point where the investigation gets very detailed, and they don't believe that the Russians are that sophisticated. But as they finally find the mechanism in the typewriters that allows them to figure out that, yes, they are being tapped and the information is getting out of the embassy, then all of a sudden, all kinds of new perspectives are brought into place. I won't give away the ending of the story, but it's a very interesting insight. But it brings up the issue here that over the few weeks ago, we saw spy balloons flying overhead, made national news, carried on the debate, are we being spied on by the Chinese and the Russians? Is our electronics being tapped into? And is this an ongoing basis, or once they're caught, they stop doing it? These are open-ended questions. We're going to ask our two individuals here in the world of broadcasting and media and balloons and all their backgrounds without having to mention all the details. Gentlemen, thank you for being on the show, and I'll start the first question and then I'll open it for discussion. Gentlemen, behind me is the balloon that floated over the US, and we used a very expensive missile to bring it down. I think they should have just shot it, but that's a whole different issue. Do you believe that these foreign countries are spying on the US, and are these balloons part of that process? It's open for discussion.
Well, I think it was determined that these balloons were not just looking at the weather, they were looking at whatever was on the ground. Apparently, there's something more to be seen from a balloon at high altitude than a satellite in space. So I think that was the conclusion that our government came to after seeing these balloons.
I mean, we did the same thing in World War I and World War II and Korea and Cold War. We sent balloons the other way. So it's logically to assume that they're now doing it this way.
Well, the
Right.
big question is, we have technology at the level we have it, quantum computing. We have all these satellites, as Craig mentioned. Why balloons? These little things that are moving, I don't know how fast, 10, 20 knots per hour, or maybe faster. Why turn to this kind of old technology to spy?
It's cheap. Think of what a balloon costs versus a multi-gazillion dollar satellite.
Who's trying to save money? The
I
Chinese?
mean, they obviously weren't trying to keep it a secret. It was easy to spot. I mean, maybe they wanted to see what our reaction would be. I mean, I'm just speculating.
Sure.
I really couldn't tell you.
But the more interesting question about the balloon is, and this is why I invited Craig to come in. One of the balloons is allegedly a weather balloon launched by and I'm going to use this rather liberally, a ham radio club, to see if they could track the balloon as it traveled around the Earth. And you figure this balloon was fairly cheap, maybe a couple of $100 to build it, and we shot it down with a $500,000 missile. And they still haven't conclusively proved that it was or it wasn't. But the day they shot it down was the day the balloon disappeared.
All right.
Okay.
Let me sort of try to put different technologies together in my mind, because I'm the outsider. I'm not into the ham radio side. So help me understand. Ham radio is not high frequency, breaks through walls, accessing information worldwide, etc. Ham radio is a very low frequency, common public use material. So how would this balloon be associated with ham radios?
There was one balloon associated with ham radios. We're talking about the one that was, well, I think there have been 4 balloons that have been shot down, and one was the ham radio club. So I think the ham radio club, well, for one thing, understand that according to the FAA, if a balloon is under a certain weight, they don't have to register it. So it wasn't like they could see this on a radar and say, oh, that's that balloon registered. It was under the weight, didn't have to be registered. And probably the only people that knew about it was the people who belonged to the club. I really wish that article that I wrote is available now. It's going to come out next week, and it will explain a lot more better than I can. But it's a fascinating article about how a club came up with something with a low-cost balloon. And unfortunately, not everybody could figure out what it was when they saw it.
Matter of fact, I was going to make the proposal. I think it'd be really cool for us to do that, just to say our missile got shot down.
So now these little innocent guys called ham radio operators are now elevated to the level of worldwide espionage, if I understand the public newspapers correctly.
What a concept. I can become my own private spy. Wow. Change my call sign to KM6 Spies.
Well, if they wanted to keep ground speed, altitude, and temperature a secret, it won't be able to be kept a secret from ham radio clubs.
So you guys were propelled up to the public image now from little subtle clubs out there in the corner. Now you guys are in the big times. You guys are running down Manhattan, New York City. Now you're a threat to national security, I think, right?
Wow, what a cool idea.
Go ahead.
If you look at the roof on Craig's house, it looks like the NSA already. So we're well on the way of,
Yes, I have a lot of antennas. It looks like a CIA listening station.
We always know when a politician's in the area because there's this big black Escalade parked out in front of his house.
Well, Yeah, when it comes to antennas, the sky's the limit. I mean, we've got one member of our club has I think it's a 50 to 75-foot tower. She cranks it up. It telescopes up when it gets too windy. It comes. She cranks it back down, and then when the wind is gone and those low lightning storms, like we had a lightning storm last week, she cranks it back up. And it's these ham radio antennas are the skies. When it comes to antennas, the sky's the limit. I mean, we got a member of our club that's selling his portable ham radio antenna for cheap now for just $25,000. You got to tow it with a trailer. I mean, it's amazing.
25,000?
Yeah, yeah. It's towed on a trailer. He cranks it up, and then it telescopes up into the air, and it's just it's huge. I have a deployable antenna that I can throw in the back of the pickup truck and stuff. That's my field deployable antenna. His and field deployable antenna is really something. It's in the last issue of the so it's in the February issue of our newsletter. You'll see a picture of it. It's just amazing.
I'm sort of taken in by all this information. When I thought of ham radio, I thought of something small, a little box, a little handheld radio, maybe a couple of little. You're telling me this thing is a lot more elaborate than all that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's very elaborate.
Okay, let me get a little bit again. Let me inquire. Let's assume that this is a ham radio sent balloon. Okay, regardless of what else might be possible. Okay, so I sent it up. How do the ham radio individuals use this balloon?
Craig knows more about, but they basically have a small solar panel to drive a Arduino self-contained computer with basically a GPS transmitter on it, and it's 1 or 2 watts or something like that. It's not real big, and you just follow the GPS tracker broadcast system, and as it travels around the world. That's a very simple version.
And it broadcasts on a frequency that is picked up by what they call automatic packet reporting system. A lot of different devices, radios and stuff are using this APRS, automatic packet reporting system. It's a very popular technology used for tracking. We have radios that incorporate that, so I can go out on a drive in my car, and you can track me driving all over the city. People have also used APRS on airplanes. They have a private airplane. I've seen, you could look at a map and see a little symbol of an airplane going across. If somebody takes them hiking or backpacking, you can track them as they're hiking through the hills. We have two ham radio operators in our club that are on a road trip on Route 66. And we've been tracking them and talking to them on the radio, but we go up to this website, and I can give you the website address if you'd like to look at it.
We'll do that at the end of the show. Yes.
Yeah, we could track them driving all over Route 66 and everything. And people have also used the same technology, using an Arduino board, broadcasting out on a particular, what we call the APRS national calling frequency. And that's essentially what this balloon was doing. Anybody could have gone to the website and they could track their balloon as it's going across the United States or around the world or over Canada or wherever you want to go.
Okay, a lot of technical material here, and I'm trying to get through it and try to understand it. So forgive me if we're trying to reclassify the information. So this balloon has a solar panel on it, and it's recharging this computer that's sending out a signal of where it is. So as it's floating across whatever the atmosphere, the signal that it's sending back down goes into something that we can track it through our computers, or our different members with different ham radios are following it as it travels and sending that information back or sharing it with the other ham radio members?
Both, yes. Simplest way to watch it is to simply see it being tracked across a map, but they are also getting information about its altitude, temperature, and by watching how fast it moves, it was the ground speed and also the altitude. So there were other frequencies that was being transmitted out where they could get this information.
All right, so far so good. So can you also attach a camera to it?
Sure, why not? If the technology is small enough.
Yeah, there's little tiny cameras.
Yeah. I mean, that whole package on that ham radio balloon was a couple of pounds, maybe. If you look at the Chinese one, just, the huge panels and everything else, we're talking an order of magnitude bigger for the Chinese and an order smaller for ham radio,
The computer on the Ham Radio Club was about the size of a business card, and the little solar panels were just slightly bigger. And you'll love, I wish I could show you the picture. You'll love seeing this article when it finally comes out. But it was quite an interesting article.
Okay, let me push the limit here. You two decided you understand the balloon and you understand the technology that you could put underneath it. How would you use it to spy?
To spy.
Take pictures, just take the pictures and send them back.
I guess if bear in mind what made this ham radio balloon legal was it was under a weight limit specified by the FAA. So it was well underneath that weight limit. I don't know, once you start adding a camera and a way to take a picture, you got to get a bigger and bigger balloon now. And now you're talking about using it to spy. Obviously, if you don't want to obey the law, then then the sky's the limit. Again, the sky's the limit. Whatever you want, whatever you're willing to invest and buy.
But the balloon is out in the ocean. And the balloon is going over Europe, Asia, maybe Russia. So did you break any laws?
I'm not sure about the laws in other countries. I'm not sure about that. Breaking their laws, I really couldn't tell you for sure.
You can buy those balloons on Amazon or eBay or who knows where. So I mean, it's
really?
Yeah. I don't know what they cost.
These balloons?
Not the Chinese version, but
right. Made in China, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's call it. It's a Pico balloon, and it's on Amazon. They're about this big, and usually it's about the same size as those big balloons you see at parties. This particular ham radio balloon was a Mylar balloon. Mylar does not stretch. So when they first launched it, it looked like a balloon that was half inflated because once it gets up to altitude, the pressure inside is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. They don't want it to pop when it gets up to 42,000 feet. They want it to go up to a particular altitude and stay there. This was a very, how can I say, inexpensive project that this Ham Radio Club did. And they have a website that they advertised their balloon launches, and they networked with other people that did balloon launches and things like that. So this wasn't just one thing that one club did, but it's starting to becoming a popular thing with what I mentioned before, APRS. People are finding new and inventive ways of tracking things on APRS. They even put them on model rockets and things like that. So when they land someplace, they can go and find them. It's just one of those things that keeps growing and growing in popularity.
Okay, so your club theoretically decides that you want to do one of these balloons and send it out and do all the technical things you can do with it, and put in a camera and the whole package. What would it cost? And how much time would it take to do that?
Oh, if I had to make a wild guess, a couple $100 probably.
The Arduino boards, along with the Raspberry Pis, I think the Arduino boards are getting hard to find. Curt, I know you have some Arduino boards. That's the small little computer that's launched with a balloon. You bought yours years ago, and how much did they cost?
I bought all my stuff when Radio Shack went out of business, and I just bought everything Arduino because I could get it for half off or 75% off. I probably got a couple of those boards out in the garage. Hadn't even looked at them yet until the balloon thing came up and thought, I have a project.
Okay, I have a proposal for you, and I'm making this official on the air. My company will fund your project for $200 if you'll put on the balloon Armando F. Sanchez production and then send it out.
We'll certainly keep that in mind.
We'll keep that in mind.
I will officially sponsor your quote unquote spy balloon across the world.
No, weather research with photography.
I'm making it official, so I look forward to doing this in 2023, guys.
I mean, putting a camera on it would be a pretty big leap. Have you ever looked out of an airplane that was cruising at 40,000 feet? It is so high up you can't even see the ground. I mean, I'm just wondering what there would be to take a picture of it that high. In order to be an effective spy balloon, it's got to have an extreme amount of telescopic ability, and that's going to add to the weight. So
gentlemen, look at the balloon behind me. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now somebody took a picture of that and put it on international news. Now, even if yours comes up somehow and somebody spots it and takes a picture of it and puts it on international news, I think it's a wonderful $200 advertising investment for me.
Now those balloons were as big as 2 buses. The Ham Radio Club balloon was that big.
Yeah.
Details, gentlemen. As soon as your balloon starts going over Murmansk in Russia or some other places, I'm sure your balloon will become famous.
Okay. Yeah. What's interesting is all these balloons are identified with a ham radio call sign. So even this balloon, as it was beaconing out the club radio's ham radio call sign with I guess the dash number was 15 or something like that, stands for balloons or something. See, everybody that beacons on APRS, they have a dash number to help identify what they are. So I think it was a club sign dash 15 for balloon or something like that. Yeah.
This balloon theoretically, and weather conditions, etc., all taken into account, can it go around the world?
Oh yeah. That ham radio went around at least 3 times.
Yeah.
How long would it take?
Oh, I don't know. I've
Okay.
Curt,
No, I don't know.
Take a guess. A month?
Oh, it went from, they spotted it coming over Alaska. It took it like 12 hours to get over Canada. I'm gonna take a guess. I'm gonna 2 to 3 days probably.
If you hit the jet stream, the jet stream's moving at 700-800 miles an hour.
Yeah, no longer than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so when do we have a launch date here?
Curt's the big tinkerer.
All right. Okay. Well, after
And
the
he
show,
already has the,
you
he already
guys
has
give me
the
a
board.
schedule so that we can start preparing the publicity of this project that you guys are on. But just keep in mind, please, that I'm only sponsoring it. You're the techie guys, so that if anything goes wrong, it's the techie guys that did it, not the sponsor. That we made it official. So
Yeah.
the idea here is, what little in talking to Hahn, there's a certain amount of all electronics have no allegiance to anybody. Once it escapes the building, which obviously it does not escape the NSA building, once it escapes, it goes into the sky. And I understand a while back that some of the information is trapped in the ionosphere. Now, very technical. I'm not going to get into all the details. By tapping in that area, they can grab a certain amount of communication that's sort of suspended there. Does this balloon enter an area where there is information that is floating in that high 45,000 feet that it could retrieve and it could resend it out somewhere else?
If you figure a radio, I send a signal out and it bounces off the ionosphere and winds up in France. It kind of goes, I don't think it stays up there. We've all seen the Twilight Zone episodes of, the Martians turning on their TVs and watching reruns from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. I don't know if it's quite that, but
Atmospheric conditions can help enhance and make radio waves reflect, bounce, or travel much further than other atmospheric conditions. But bearing in mind, it doesn't get stored up there. It's still moving along at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. So it doesn't just, it doesn't hang there. It's always traveling at the same amount of speed. The atmospheric conditions can help enhance and make the radio waves travel farther. But no, they don't get stored at at a particular atmosphere or anything like that.
Referring back to the book, one of the things they found out that the electronics equipment generates a signal, and that signal radiates out into the world. Well, if you spend enough money, you can make a receiver to capture that signal, but you're talking a big amount of money for a very small signal.
But if the signal is coming from an important source, you want to tap into it.
Yeah. There's a China Lake Weapon Station up in the desert, up in Eastern California. They're dead zones. So if you're driving from point A to point B and your car radio is on, they not only know where you're at, they know what station you're listening to, even though you're not technically transmitting. It's the equipment that itself is radiating.
You know, I normally don't make the connection. I haven't for the years I've been around you guys for the ham radio, that really this isn't just a little hobby where you're just sort of trying to communicate with each other, which we now do with our cell phones. But you guys are actually transmitting worldwide. And I understand that in an emergency where many things would go down, our normal communications would go down, somehow or other, the ham radios continue to communicate. Is that the case?
Again, you're taking a signal off a radio and you're bouncing it from point A to point B. All you need is power, basically.
And communicating off the grid is something that part of ham radio. We have many events where we go off the grid, go completely battery power or gas generator power, and practice what they call field days, where we go out in the middle of nowhere and bring our field deployable antennas and set them up and either get out the batteries and the solar panels and rechargeable batteries.
If you go back to that movie Independence Day of years gone by, when they're getting ready to attack the aliens, they're doing it on Morse code. All that old technology saved the world. And I was one of those guys at last field day. I was out in my backyard running everything off of solar panels, charging my batteries to run my radios. I just want to see if I could do it.
Let me ask a question, because something that I just remembered when I was a kid, I was raised in Mexico, and there's an area south of the border that people said this was at one time a German transmitting house. It was being used for transmitting signals from there, and there was no electrical lines back then, but I remember the house. It was all made out of stone. My question now is, now I'm starting to understand a little bit. So could that location, which was remotely sitting by itself back then, be transmitting to a ship or a submarine via using ham radio?
Sure, why not?
Yes. The building's still there, but is the antenna still there?
I don't know. I don't think so.
There was I don't remember where I saw it, but I know that they were finding solar-powered radio transmitting stations up in the mountains of Utah, and they couldn't figure out who was doing that, setting up a transmitter or relay or repeater station on a solar panel. They were pulling them out, and people were reinstalling them. So
I remember seeing movies where they used to have the hand cranks to generate electricity. So you were completely independent. And we're talking very old technology. So that's still going on.
A question of getting back to the German radio station in Mexico, was Mexico neutral during World War II?
Yes, it was neutral. But everybody was using Mexico and South America that were all neutral, but they were still using it, because there was a lot of activity. The border, crossing the border between US and Mexico is very easy. So there was no, and then a lot of the laws were very open. There was no prohibition in Mexico. There was no rationing of food in Mexico during World War II. So, people didn't suffer where they couldn't eat meat and they couldn't eat sugar and all that. Everything was at equal supply. So there was a lot of activity back and forth. The role of ham radios now being, like you say, back then, a much more simpler technology, and yet it had an implication that it could go worldwide, sort of opens up the whole idea that you guys are now working in little tiny little toys, especially now that we have these stories showing us that espionage can be done worldwide, even in a very old technology.
Well, that's why I got the book, because again, the book review was in the QST magazine. the book is written by a guy who is a ham radio operator. The main character was a ham radio guy. They all got started through ham radios and eventually took that technology to a more professional level.
Let me quickly ask this question. I have not touched it yet, and it's very much part of the book. And again, I'm trying to stay away from being technical here as much as possible. The whole concept of microwave communication using microwaves. And then that brings up the secondary point, the Havana syndrome. What is it? And that's still an ongoing mystery, whether it's a technology being used that's damaging the personnel inside the embassies and the consulates. I want to get into the second part, but I did want to mention it. So the microwave, I always think of it as obviously the one in my kitchen. And if I put something in there and I microwave it, I'm cooking it. But what I'm learning from you gentlemen is that microwaves are used to send out signals. Could you sort of explain that a little bit to us and how that doesn't become dangerous?
I wouldn't stand in front of the antenna.
We, as ham radio operators, we have a privilege of communicating on what they call the 5 gigahertz band. Well, the 5 gigahertz band and the 2 gigahertz band. Now, that sounds a little really technical, but that is what people classify as microwave. I have an antenna on the roof of my house that used to be a satellite dish. And instead of being pointed into space, I now have a what they call the device that's in front of the dish. I have what they call a 5 gigahertz transmitter there. And I'm able to point it to another station that is broadcasting on that 5 gigahertz microwave band. And I'm able to communicate digitally. This is something that came out 7 or 8 years ago, and it's really catching on. But ham radio operators do have a privilege of communicating on a microwave band. I've stood many times in front of my radio. I haven't gotten burned or anything. Probably because the frequency, it's a different microwave intensity and frequency that you use to cook in your microwave oven. But I remember somebody telling me, that is microwave, isn't it? I said, it is. I've never gotten burned yet. But anyways, so we do also communicate on this 5 gigahertz microwave band. And I have to tell you, we don't communicate too much on voice, but we communicate digitally, and it sends information just so fast. It's just amazing. I have sent what they call digital email on the ham radio band, the same band that we use voice on. And it's like connecting with an old style modem. Remember when modems first came out and you dialed into a phone number and then you hear blah and all these weird buzzing and sounding? That's what it sounds like to communicate digitally on the FM band that we use in ham radio. With a microwave digital communication, it goes like right now, it's done. It's just amazing. So there's a lot of interesting things that ham radio operators are doing with microwave. If I see somebody throwing out their satellite dish, I'll grab it and I'll make it into a ham radio microwave.
There's a whole backbone in California that runs along the mountaintops. We're just towers, microwave towers of amateur radio. There's a name for it, Craig. I'm trying to remember what it is, but Arden, I think, is the name of it. It's that they have these towers, and they just line of sight. All it takes is one bird to fly between 2 towers, and you lose your signal. But
as long as he keeps flying,
yeah. People are doing. Matter of fact, there's stories of people go out looking for old microwave ovens to use the parts in it to make their microwave systems.
Oh, I never thought of that one. That's interesting.
Yeah. So that way, you can send your signal out and cook dinner at the same time.
I'm not sending out no espionage signals. I'm cooking my hot dog. Yeah, right. Now I get the idea of trying to do both at the same time. Gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the show, unfortunately. And thank you for helping me sort of move up the knowledge level of electronics, but at the same time, keeping it at a level where we can manage it for someone like myself. 2 things. Number one, I'd like to make sure that as we're approaching the show, we get the website where anyone watching the show can go and look at your newsletter and ask questions and find out. Now, I'm going to put you guys on the spot, and that's okay. Just do the best you can. Is the interest of radio, ham radios, is it growing? Is it growing nationally? Is it growing internationally?
It's growing. I know this because during the height of the COVID crisis, we switched from in-person testing to Zoom testing, similar to what we're talking on right now. And during the height of that, we and about 40 other people would get on Zoom, and we were every other Saturday we'd be testing over 100 hams in one day to get their license. So I would say it's definitely growing. It's not dying. It's diversifying in many different ways, digitally and all these other things we talk about in ham radio. It used to be just people talking or people tapping out Morse code. There's so many different things you can do with ham radio nowadays. There's something for everyone. Curt is doing things with digital. I was doing things with Arden with the microwave stuff, and now there's the APRS of tracking things. Either you're driving in your car or a balloon or whatever. There's so many different things that are happening in ham radio, and so it's diversifying. And I definitely say it is growing.
It's the same thing. I have a digital radio here that links up to internet and radio repeaters. And I'm trying to contact my buddies over in Arizona through that because I can't. I have one of those APRS capable radios, and I don't need it because my wife knows where I'm at telepathically. But there's such a diversity that you can't say it's just 10-4, good buddy. It's people are doing a wide variety of stuff, and that's the beauty of it all. There's guys like me. I like the building of the stuff. To me, the building is a lot more, sometimes more fun than the talking.
There's people into putting stuff together and building stuff, like Josh is always making stuff. I don't think he ever talks on the radio. He just likes to make stuff and then give it out to other people.
I can imagine how insightful it is for young people to get into this, other than just picking up your cell phone and calling somebody, but learning a world of technology that's evolving, and it can get extremely complicated if you understand the basics and then move up the ladder. I mean, you could get into space broadcasting and much other levels of really NSA level.
Yeah, there's ham radio operators that will communicate with the space shuttle or the International Space Station when they have a special event. Oh gosh, there's people. I remember I used to belong to a club where the guy was doing moon belts, where he would point an antenna towards the moon, broadcast a signal, and it would reflect off the moon and be picked up by somebody else in the other part of the world. The ham radio signal travels at 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000 kilometers, which is about the same distance between the Earth and the moon. So he could talk, and he'd say, "Hello, moon," and the moment he stopped talking, you hear his own voice, "Hello, moon," because it had hit the moon and bounced off again. So there's just so many different things. It just goes on and on.
Sunday night, one of our club members and I were trying to reach the guys in Arizona, and she keyed up her radio, and she was talking to some guy in Australia who just happened to hear the call go out and answered. It's just a lot of fun.
Well, as we're getting ready to final moments, there are two things. Obviously, I'd like you guys to give your closing statements as well. And two things we have to remember. First, we're going to give out the website where anyone in the world who watching this information can contact you guys and learn more about it. And number two, remind you that we have a schedule to meet to send up my balloon with my name on it around the world in 2023.
If that's ever realized, I promise you we'll put your name on a balloon.
Okay, well, I'll fund it. I already stated that. So first of all, the website, please.
Rio Hondo Amateur Radio Club. Rio Hondo Amateur Radio Club on Facebook. That's probably the first place this show will show up.
The URL for the club's website, which has a drop-down list for every newsletter of 2022 and 2023, is rharc.org. And once you go there, you can see every newsletter that we've written in the past year and this year. And coming out on Monday of next week will be the article on the ham radio weather balloon.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, as we in closure, your closing statements. Mr. Hahn?
Well, I got into ham radio because it was a bucket list item. And since I've retired, I just having a grand old time just playing with the different aspects. Craig said tinkering with things. It's not the success I'm interested in, it's the doing that I'm interested in. You can learn a lot from failure. It's the doing to see if I can do it or not. And I think there's a lot of that missing when you pick up a cell phone and just, but yeah, I got into for that reason, just having a grand old time. You know, and if you think about World War II, and I know they did at World War I, they outlawed ham radio entirely for the duration of the war because they were afraid of espionage. Ukraine, when the Russians went into Ukraine, they cut off ham radio. Now, it doesn't mean it's not doing it, but legally it's been cut off, you know. So yeah, it's draw your own conclusions. You know?
Wonderful statement. Thank you, Mr. Curt Hahn. Craig?
I'm going to give a real simple answer about me getting into ham radio. When I was about 12 years old, I had a friend whose older brother was into ham radio, and I was visiting his house one day, and they had one bedroom of the house dedicated to his ham radio shack. And he showed me all the ham, I went in there and I could see all this equipment all around. I just thought this was the coolest thing. And up on the wall, he had what they called QSL cards. They were like postcards that people send you if you make contact with them, has their call sign on it and stuff. And I remember just marveling at the wall of all these QSL cards on the wall. And I thought, that's like got to be the coolest thing in the world, but it's an expensive hobby. I had to wait until I was in adulthood before I could indulge in that. And right now I'm looking at on the walls of my room. I wish I could show it to you, but I got QSL cards all over the wall of my house, of my room. So I had to wait until I was in adulthood to do that. So that's neat.
Well, I'll close in summary. I have to admit that I always thought, and I've said this several times, as ham radio as being something very simplistic. It can do a little bit, transmit from here to there. And from this show, I've gotten entirely a 180-degree turn on that it can be at any level you want to. And since your club is going to put together this non-spy balloon to go around the world, from an amateur point of view, it sort of highlights for me, just because it's simpler now because of our technology, doesn't mean that it is not sophisticated. And I'm trying to balance those two. So I appreciate what your work is, you and your club members, and to help others grow in this area, to expand our creativity, to be able to show us the world of electronics and communication, which is going to only grow. And those that have the background and can tap into the basic understanding and grow from there, I think they have a fantastic future. So I know you're doing it as a hobby, but gentlemen, thank you very much for being on our show and for educating me and our listeners and viewers. And hopefully other people will pick up the banner and jump on board and also do the ham radio. And you guys start talking to the world and bouncing your signals off the moon and maybe someday off Mars.
Okay.
All right, cool.
Thank you, gentlemen.
You're quite welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Armando F. Sanchez. Thank you for being on our program here today. And please feel free to contact either gentleman or send me email, and I'll forward it to them as well. This is an extremely interesting field. And as you see, these two balloons that are up there, are they for spying or are they just for general use? We probably will not know anytime soon. But the idea is electronics opens up a massive world of interest. So please take advantage of it. Gentlemen, thank you for being on the show.
No problem.
You're quite welcome.